Let's take a look at this article. I think you're going to find this super fascinating. Before I go to the beginning of the article, I want to read something to you at the very end. Now listen to this and then think about this as I read this article to you. Steve Perry had described Journey's music as aggression with feeling. Okay, now keep that in the back of your mind as you read this article, and I think you're going to find this really fascinating. I was a real ambitious kid. I was bound to be found by somebody, said Neal Schon, Journey's lead guitarist, who at the age of 15 began his professional career as a member of Carlos Santana's band. I was like a street kid, 14 years old, constantly on the streets of San Francisco with my guitar, trying to get into clubs that you're not allowed in unless you're 21. But I would eventually make friends with all the club owners so they'd let me in, and I'd play with anybody who'd let me. I was just real ambitious to play with anybody, and I'd practice for hours. It was in one of these clubs that Neal first met Greg Raleigh, Journey's keyboard player, which ultimately led to his joining Carlos Santana. Now, I know most people already know this, but just in case you didn't, and for those people who haven't seen this before, this is Santana 3, and this is the first time that we would see Neal Schon in the band Santana. And of course, here, this is Santana 3, and this is the inside. This is Neal Schon right there. I think he's 16 in this picture. Then, of course, this is Greg Raleigh, and these two would go off after this point, after they left Santana, and they would go off and form Journey. Now, this other face you might recognize, and this guy is Michael Shrieve. And the reason you might recognize him is because if you're familiar with the band HSAS, Hagar, Shawn, Aronson, Shrieve, which was another supergroup that would come out in the 80s, this is the Michael Shrieve that's part of Hagar, Shawn, Aronson, Shrieve. This is the guy right here. So if you've never knew who this guy was, the reason he ended up in HSAS because Neal Schon and Michael Shrieve knew each other from back in the Santana days. All right, let's pick up with this. I used to tell my family that in another month, I'd be in one of the biggest bands in the world, said Schon. And they'd say, that's really good. I really like the confidence this kid has. And they'd sort of laugh. Within the next month, I swear, Eric Clapton had asked me to join him, and so had Santana, and my parents were totally blown away. They thought I had ESP. Schon went with Santana even though he preferred Clapton's type of music. I really wanted to play with Clapton because he was one of my guitar heroes at the time, from the Cream days, and he's really had an influence on me, said Schon. When he asked me to play with him, I just sort of picked myself off the floor. But if I had gone with Eric, I would have had to move to England, and I was only 15, and I didn't think I was ready to do that. I was also pretty friendly with the guys in Santana's band. By the way, is that just not the most fascinating thing? That Neal Schon, really a kid, and he's getting recruited to go play with these amazing musicians, these legendary people. It just always amazes me thinking about that. And Neal, let's be honest, Neal Schon was just that good, just an incredible player. When Santana disbanded a year later, Herbie Herbert, Santana's production manager, now Journey's manager, Neal Schon, Greg Raleigh, and bass player Ross Valory joined forces with Prairie Prince, now with the Tubes. And by the way, if you weren't familiar with that, I got out a Tubes album here. This is the completion backward principle. You remember the Tubes are the ones that had the song, Talk to You Later, Don't Want to Hear It Again Tonight. Remember that song? Anyway, and right there is Prairie Prince. So anyway, that's who they're talking about here that they originally started working with when they went off to, start this new thing. And a rhythm guitarist named George Tickner to form Journey in 1973. Now, 7 years later, after a few changes in personnel, the group is lead vocalist Steve Perry, Greg Raleigh, Neal Schon, drummer Steve Smith, and Ross Valory, and they've just released their 7th Columbia LP, Departure, the final album in their trilogy.